Late in the evening of October 1st, Iran carried out its largest missile strike against Israel to date as part of Operation True Promise 2.
This is a major attack. Jim Sciutto, this is obviously
a major attack. There's no
what
question.
You are seeing.
Iran launched over 180 ballistic missiles, hitting several Israeli military bases. Israel immediately promised to respond forcefully, but there are signs that both sides are trying to manage the escalation and avoid a full-scale war. Before we dive into the broader implications of this conflict, let's go through the events in order, keeping in mind that the situation is evolving very quickly. On the night of Monday, the Israeli military made a limited incursion into Lebanese territory. Though small in scope at the time, this marked the official start of a new Israeli conflict in Lebanon. This time, however, the target is not the Lebanese government but Hezbollah, the well-entrenched Shiite militia. In an earlier report, it was noted that Israel's ground move followed an extensive air campaign aimed at softening Hezbollah's positions. As a result of these airstrikes, much of Hezbollah's leadership was wiped out, including its leader Hassan Nasrallah and 9 top commanders. 2 months prior, another key figure, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, a pro-Iranian group, was also killed. The deaths of these 2 prominent leaders, Nasrallah in Beirut and Haniyeh in Gaza, became the main reason for Iran's retaliation on the evening of October 1st. Around 7 p.m. local time, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched about 180 ballistic missiles toward Israel. Among them were the Ahmad and Qadir models, with Iran also claiming to have used a domestically produced medium-range hypersonic missile, the Fateh-2, for the first time. Iran's defense minister Amir Hatami stated that their primary targets were Israeli military operational and intelligence centers, and they aimed to disable Israel's R-2 and R-3 ballistic missile defense systems. Some of the Israeli bases which were hit included Nevatim, which houses Israel's F-35 fighter jets, along with the Hatzor and Telephone Naf bases. However, it's likely that Israel had already scrambled its F-35s into the air by the time the attacks occurred. Footage also showed explosions near the headquarters of Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. This missile attack was even larger than the one in April, when 120 missiles were launched at Israel. Israel reported that the majority of the incoming rockets were intercepted with significant help from the United States. As of October 1st, 7 American ships, including the USS Cole, USS Arleigh Burke, and USS Wasp, were stationed in the eastern Mediterranean. In the Red Sea, 5 additional ships were present, including the USS Frankie Peterson Jr. and USS Stockdale. Meanwhile, a large U.S.-British naval force with 6 ships was deployed in the Persian Gulf, and the USS Abraham Lincoln Aircraft Carrier Group was on standby in the Gulf of Oman. Despite the seriousness of these exchanges, both Israel and Iran appear to be trying to limit the scale of the conflict. While the missile strikes were significant, neither side has yet moved towards a broader, more destructive war, although the situation remains tense and could shift rapidly. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu swiftly responded to Iran's missile strike by promising severe retaliation, stating that Iran had made a grave error and would face significant consequences. As of now, however, Israel has not yet launched a counterattack. The question remains, will Israel respond with a powerful assault on Iran, which has far less advanced air defense systems and lacks the kind of international support that Israel can count on, particularly from the United States? Despite the dramatic footage of the missile strikes, there are signs that both sides are carefully managing the escalation, treating it as part of a larger, calculated strategy rather than letting it spiral into an all-out war. This measured approach raises several important questions. Why, despite the high-impact visuals and rhetoric, does it seem that the exchange is happening within a controlled framework? Both Israel and Iran seem to be calculating the costs and benefits of each move, avoiding actions that could lead to a wider conflict. To understand the current situation, it's useful to look back at Iran's missile attack on Israel in April, which serves as a key reference point. That attack, while smaller in scale compared to the recent one, was significant at the time. Iran launched around 300 rockets and drones towards Israel in retaliation for an Israeli airstrike on a diplomatic outpost in Damascus, which resulted in the death of 7 officers from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Despite the size of the assault, Israel, with assistance from the U.S., managed to handle it relatively smoothly. A key factor in Israel's preparedness was that Iran had notified the U.S. 72 hours in advance, giving Israel enough time to brace for the strike. This time, although the circumstances appear different, the underlying dynamics are strikingly similar. The stakes are much higher now, as Iran is responding not just to the killing of 7 IRGC officers, but to the assassinations of 2 prominent leaders of the Axis of Resistance, Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas. Moreover, Israel's recent incursion into Lebanese territory has added fuel to the fire. In line with the logic of escalation, Iran increased the intensity of its response. Instead of the 120 ballistic missiles it fired during the April attack, it launched around 180 this time, significantly raising the pressure. The warning time for this attack was also much shorter, only a few hours, although Iran did still notify the Americans beforehand. Additionally, Iran's IRGC carried out a coordinated cyber attack on Israel's military cyber units during the missile strike. Yet despite the heightened aggression, the outcome was similar to the April attack. Israel, aided by U.S. intelligence and defense support, managed to avoid major casualties or significant damage. Minor damage was reported at bases like Nevatim, and remarkably, only one person, a Palestinian, was killed when a missile propulsion module accidentally fell on him. Israel's air defenses, bolstered by American technology, intercepted most of the missiles, neutralizing what could have been a catastrophic assault. Given this context, it is uncertain whether Israel will launch a massive counteroffensive against Iran. The key question is whether Israel sees it as strategically wise to escalate further, considering that Iran, despite its aggressive actions, seems to be carefully calculating its moves. While the temptation for a large-scale retaliation exists, both sides may ultimately decide to keep the conflict within certain limits to avoid triggering a broader regional war. For now, the situation remains tense, and the world waits to see if Israel will strike back with full force, or if both nations will continue to engage in this tit-for-tat exchange, keeping the conflict just below the threshold of open warfare. Although Israel is known for its aggressive military stance, recent events suggest that its response to Iran's missile strike will be more calculated rather than a full-scale escalation. In April, when Prime Minister Netanyahu promised a strong response to Iran's actions, the Israeli Air Force conducted a targeted strike on an S-300 defense system at Isfahan, one of Iran's key military bases. While this was a smaller operation compared to Iran's assault, it sent a clear message. Israel can strike critical infrastructure, including sites tied to Iran's nuclear program, without pushing the conflict into an all-out war. This back and forth resembles a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides managing the level of escalation carefully. Israel has been proactive in its military strikes for months, while Iran, aiming to maintain its image of strength both domestically and within the axis of resistance, has felt the need to retaliate. Despite Iran's large-scale missile barrage on October 1st, the attack caused surprisingly little damage to Israel. This could suggest that Iran's intention wasn't to inflict maximum destruction but to preserve its standing without provoking a more serious confrontation. An outright Iranian entry into the war at that time seemed unlikely, and though the missile barrage marked a serious escalation, it still doesn't amount to a full Iranian involvement in the conflict. Instead, what we're seeing is an intensification of a proxy war between Israel and Iran, with both sides escalating but keeping the conflict under a certain level of control. This cautious approach is especially evident given the significant military advantage Israel holds in a long-distance confrontation. Iran's missile and aerospace systems are far inferior to the advanced military technology that Israel has, not to mention the presence of the U.S. Navy in the Persian Gulf, ready to support Israel if needed. Israel's Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, recently reaffirmed Israel's military capabilities, stating, "We have the ability to reach and attack anywhere in the Middle East, and those of our enemies who have not understood this will soon understand it." This statement is not just rhetoric. It reflects Israel's confidence in its ability to strike wherever necessary. Backed by cutting-edge military technology and powerful allies like the U.S. While Israel holds this upper hand in terms of military power, Iran presents a more significant threat through unconventional warfare tactics. A guerrilla campaign using Hezbollah and other proxies poses a much more dangerous and unpredictable risk for Israel. An escalation into this kind of conflict, which would essentially be a de facto war, is something Israel is keen to avoid, especially as it begins a challenging ground campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. As of now, Israel has conducted precise airstrikes, including one on a Russian base in Latakia, Syria, shortly after an Iranian cargo plane landed there. According to Syrian state media, the attack was carried out just an hour after the Iranian plane's arrival. This demonstrates Israel's willingness to continue targeted operations against Iran's allies and proxies, even those under the protection of the Russian Federation, which adds a layer of complexity to the situation. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, continue their ground offensive in Lebanon, where they are beginning to experience the costs of the operation. By October 3rd, Israel had confirmed the deaths of 8 soldiers, while other sources, including Sky News Arabia, reported at least 14 casualties. Hezbollah, unsurprisingly, claims the toll is even higher. In footage released by the group, a Hezbollah fighter boasts of destroying 3 Israeli Merkava tanks, shooting down a helicopter, and ambushing IDF special forces. This phase of the conflict, especially the ground campaign in Lebanon, could become increasingly costly for Israel. Hezbollah is a well-entrenched force with years of experience in asymmetric warfare, and as the conflict drags on, the toll on Israeli forces may rise. Both Israel and Iran seem intent on keeping the conflict within certain boundaries, but the situation remains fragile. A single miscalculation or unplanned escalation could spark a much larger and more destructive conflict, one that neither side nor the broader region can afford. The credibility of Hezbollah's claims regarding the destruction of Israeli tanks and helicopters is difficult to verify, but it is likely that some of Israel's losses could have resulted from these engagements. A pro-Hezbollah reporter went so far as to declare, quote, "Welcome to hell," reflecting the intense nature of the conflict. On the other hand, the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, reported significant successes, claiming they had killed 60 Hezbollah fighters and destroyed 200 targets during their air campaign, which continues to target Hezbollah positions throughout Lebanon. Initial reports also give us a clearer picture of the ground offensive. Israeli tanks were observed in strategic locations such as Marun al-Ras, near the village of Bint Jabel, and Kiryat Shmona, while advancing towards Marjiyun. Israel's 36th and 998th Divisions are heavily involved in these operations, and footage released by the IDF shows the destruction of Hezbollah's tunnel systems, specifically in the village of Hula. Lebanese forces have also reported that Israeli troops briefly entered Lebanon, advancing about 1,300 feet near Odessa and Kfar before retreating after a short period of time. The Lebanese armed forces, the LAF, have taken a cautious approach, positioning themselves as neutral observers rather than active participants in the fighting. Following the Israeli invasion, the LAF announced a strategic repositioning, pulling back 5 to 6 kilometers north to avoid direct clashes with the IDF. The disparity in military capabilities is a significant factor here, as the LAF is considerably weaker than both Hezbollah and Israel. Moreover, Israel has publicly declared that Hezbollah, not Lebanon, is its primary target. The LAF's role has traditionally been to maintain internal security and order, not to engage in battles fought for Hezbollah's cause. Despite this, it's clear the LAF is not siding with Israel, and the sight of foreign troops on Lebanese soil is undoubtedly a source of frustration for the Lebanese military. The Lebanese army may still play a crucial role in maintaining order, especially if Hezbollah's dominance in southern Lebanon begins to wane. However, this prospect remains uncertain. In a telling move, the IDF issued a warning to the Arab population in southern Lebanon, instructing civilians to evacuate north of the Litani River, 50 kilometers or 30 miles further north of the Ali River. This message implies that southern Lebanon could become a target for a more comprehensive Israeli offensive. It also underscores the strategic importance of this region, given its proximity to Damascus, the Syrian capital, and a critical hub for Iran's, quote, axis of resistance. As of October 4th, tensions reached a new peak when Israeli shelling killed a Lebanese soldier, marking the first direct engagement between the two armies. The Lebanese army responded with its own fire, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Meanwhile,
Israel has continued its intense bombardment of Beirut. Unconfirmed reports suggest that Hashim Safadine, a potential successor to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, has taken charge of Hezbollah's retaliatory efforts, launching rockets toward northern Israel. However, Israel's advanced anti-aircraft systems have successfully intercepted most of these projectiles.
The U.S. has also been in talks with Israel regarding the scope of its response to Iran's missile barrage. These discussions have reportedly included the possibility of striking Iranian oil infrastructure, a vital component of the Iranian economy. While President Biden has affirmed Israel's right to retaliate proportionately, he has also cautioned against targeting Iran's nuclear facilities, likely in an effort to avoid escalating the conflict into a broader regional war. In another significant development, the Iranian president recently met with Saudi Arabia's foreign minister in Doha, Qatar. According to reports, the Gulf Arab states assured Iran that they would remain neutral in the ongoing conflict. They also made it clear that they would not allow the U.S. to use military bases on their soil to launch attacks against Iran. This is a critical assurance from Tehran's perspective, as it limits U.S. options for launching strikes in the region. Despite these diplomatic efforts to prevent further escalation, all the players involved are treading on very thin ice. In the volatile context of the Middle East, even the slightest miscalculation could turn a simmering conflict into a boiling pot. The situation remains tense, and while there is still hope for containment, the risk of a wider war looms large. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.